Hi, everybody. It's Lee Foster here of Revitalize, and I hope you're all having a phenomenal week so far. Well, a good start to the week anyway, and a good week ahead all planned for you. Welcome to this week's The Newpreneur Cast special edition, and this is the Business Data Edition. This is the first episode of 4 that I'm going to be delivering with a special guest of mine this week, next week, and the next 2 weeks after that as well. So it's a 4-week episodes that will be sharing some insight into business data and how it works. So please welcome with me my special guest for our first episode, and that is the one and only Louisa Stewart of Blue Ninja. Louisa, how are you? You well?
Good, thank you, Lee. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you on the Newpreneur Cast.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. And it's actually great that we've pulled this together with your expertise and your knowledge of how to pull it all together. But it's great to have these next 4 weeks of sharing some insights into your wealth of knowledge, in other words, really, Louisa. So absolutely superb. Well, let's kick things off. I think this week we're going to be focusing on understanding your data, which is episode 1. So, shall we share with everybody from your side really what data do businesses collect? What sort of things do they collect in their business? And I'll leave it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. And I really appreciate being able to introduce this topic because when I talk about data with businesses, they're often a little bit unsure about what they actually have. So this is to help people to get over the fears, perhaps of what data is in business, and to give some practical ideas about how to gather data and what to do with it. So just to jump straight in, there are 6 key areas of data that businesses will collect. That is finance, marketing, operations, HR, sales, and customer service. I'm going to dig into these a little bit more, but
Mm.
when you think about when you start up your business and you're getting going, those are generally the things you go for first. HR maybe a little bit later on as you're bringing consultants and team members on board, but you're still considered yourself a part of your HR policy. So, there's still practical information in there about all these different areas that you think, oh, I don't have a HR department, but you actually are yourself a part of your HR department, even if you're solopreneur. So
Yeah.
it's important to think about those things. I'm going to dive a little bit more into these one by one, but um, when we collect when we collect any sort of data in our business, often we go for what data we're collecting from people. But actually, you generate data as you grow your business, as you start to put out content or bring in leads to your business. Those are all data points. So I want you to think very broadly about what data is in your business and where you're collecting information from. Um, when you look at data itself is not something that is useful. You need to be able to measure it, and then that provides information to which you execute. So when we talk about data, it's a single item of information that's coming in, but you actually need to do something with it. Have I got you so far?
Yeah, indeed. You keep
Great.
going. Lovely.
So let's jump into these 6 areas. So the first one I want to talk about is finance, because most people, when they start a business, they have to get a bank account. So you're going to be collecting information from expenses that you collect with your business. You will be collecting, or you're sending out invoices to gather money in, profit margins, forecasts. So all of those things are data points. So you're looking at how much money you make versus how much money you spend, and then you have your profit margin. So all of those are data points, and we need to think of those as useful for analysis and for essentially guiding you on what's working and what isn't. With finance, though, it can get quite stressful when you first start out of what system to use, how are you collecting information, finding an accountant and things like that. But once you have those foundations in place, you can start to work with the finances to look at, what are you spending your money on? You start to look into the data a little bit more underneath those top level ideas like expenses. Well, what do you spend your money on? Like, I've certainly spent a fair bit on coffee, I must say, but all of it is trackable. So why not use coffee as a metric for you? How much coffee you drink in a year, for
Wow.
instance, you can measure it. So finances is where you really will start. You set up a business, you set up your finances. Operations is the next part of the work, and for B2C businesses, so businesses are working with consumers, your data collection might be a little bit different than a service-based business or a B2B business, where you might be looking at more resources developed, or you're looking at scheduling calls or client meetings, tracking projects, those sorts of things. So operations is a very broad area, and we're not going to go into it much today, but think about what type of business you have and then what data you're collecting as part of your business day-to-day operations. It might be that you provide resources. How many resources do you produce for your business? How do you track how those resources are used? I've got some tips for you in a bit on that, but let's keep going through. So HR, if you're a solopreneur, consider yourself as part of your HR plan.
Mhm.
You know, how many days do you work a year? What's your plan like for your own business work? Because you can track your hours, for instance. That data can advise you of how much time you're spending maybe on your business versus your client work. All of that can be tracked. It might also provide you with, say, you have educational opportunities. How many times or how many hours a year are you spending on your own education? All of that can be tracked. It might be that you decide that you're overwhelmed because your data is telling you that you don't have enough hours in the day. That then guides you on bringing in maybe a consultant or an employee. So HR is quite important, even if you're a solopreneur, of being able to analyze yourself and your day-to-day requirements in order to then plan for what you need for your business. The next one we've got is sales. And a lot of people will understand this as your social media. But I want you to also think that, and this is something that you talk about a lot, Lee, is it's your leads, it's your conversions, it's the
Mhm.
conversations you have to bring in paying clients. It might be resources you put out that someone pays for. Sales is a very broad area, but when you first start out, I really recommend taking some basics. So social media, for instance, is a great way to look at metrics, because a lot of social media systems give you those metrics. You might be looking at clicks, views. If you do videos, how many people watch it past, say, 3 seconds? Those metrics are really easy to find these days because a lot of social media platforms will give them to you.
Mhm.
So they're important to not ignore stuff that you can get very accessibly. Excuse
I,
me.
I guess also as well, it's a bit like when people are viewing your profile and how many connections you make on a week by week basis. So many connections you make. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, what I do for my business is I have all of my scheduling for calls automated. It goes into a system where I can then view how many of those leads are um, potential clients. They might be collaborators. They might be just a conversation that I'm not going to take anywhere, but I can then work out the percentage of those. And if I seem to be having a lot of the third category, perhaps, well, how do I then bring more collaboration opportunities or client opportunities in? You know, you can really use that data, and it's very basic information to paint a picture of where you're trying to go next. So don't discount the basics of your data, because you might be collecting really useful information, but you might not think of it that way. Um, and then also it helps you to identify strategies and trends that you can capitalize on. The other area that we've got is customer service.
Mm.
And do you ask your customers for testimonial feedback, anything like that? If you don't, you might be missing points of data that you can collect. because if you ask for feedback from your clients, or even people you have a phone conversation with, you could send them out a follow-up saying, how did our call go, what did you think? There's information that you can gather from that to understand and analyze where you're going to be most effective. So don't discount something as simple as sending a very basic feedback form to your clients, and asking them questions about how you're doing. Are you performing as they expect? Are you exceeding expectations? There's a lot of data in the customer service cycle that I think, again, maybe as small business owners, solopreneurs, you kind of discount those because you think you're not a big enough business to really take that information in. But all of that data adds value to your business.
It's another good point there, Louis. Sorry to jump in, but it's the developing your product and your services. So the feedback is sort of really important. If you're delivering something really well and you think you're doing well, but if you're asking the individuals and your clients of what you're doing at the moment, and they
Mm.
give you the responses back, you can actually develop and grow and make your product and service even better through that information. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, use that feedback for, if you're looking at new opportunities within your business and the feedback is telling you that there's something wrong, don't release something that is based on the same information. Maybe change it up to account for what the issues are, or what you've identified in that feedback, to then move forward. There's
Mm.
no point in spending more time on something that isn't working.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And the data will tell you that.
Mm.
I think HR, as I said, is one of those areas where it's good to be mindful of your overall wellness. I work with a mindset coach, and it's all about, if you're taking on too much work, what can you outsource? Because your data is going to be telling you that your hours are going up and up and up. The clients might be feeding back to you saying you're not getting things done. The data is going to inform you of what your requirements are. If you're in a growth phase, you can plan ahead for the times of the year, perhaps, that you know that you're going to need assistance. Perhaps if you're doing seasonal work, or if you're in if you're ahead of an event or something or other, and you know that you're going to need people to come in and help you. All of that information is going to provide you with a plan of attack, because the data is telling you that, in June, July, August, maybe that your time of year might not be as intensive as maybe October, November, and December.
Mm.
And when you first start out, you might not know all this, but as you grow over a year, 2 years, 3 years, you can actually start to see patterns.
Yeah.
I love a good pattern, I can tell you.
Do you know, it's a good one you've just led into there as well, because people always say, what data should you be paying attention to when you're just sort of starting out into business as well? Because I don't think, personally, Louise, I don't think people take that too seriously at the beginning.
They don't. I didn't. I can tell you now that when I first started my business, I didn't know what a business looked like, let alone what data I should be trying to understand. How often do businesses not even write a business plan because they don't know how to then forecast? It's I mean, it's all too common. And if you can use data, I mean, data drives businesses. For the Fortune 500 companies, they'll say the business is the backbone of their business is data, because it's telling them where to focus their energies and to really direct. Once they have something that where the data is showing good results, they'll do more of it. So when you start out in business, you might not have any data to work on, but look at the foundations, look at the basics. Get yourself your finances in a place where you can understand them. You can really track that information, because when it starts to get busy and grow, you don't want to be going, well, I didn't really pay attention to that when I first started out. I kind of went, I'll deal with it later on.
Mm.
And that's where a lot of businesses run into problems, because they don't plan ahead with their data about when things get busier. Oh, I've been using an Excel spreadsheet for the last year. Might have been great to start with, but then you have to think about when you don't have time to spend filling in that data, what are you going to do then?
Mm.
So I think those really basic things are One, calls.
Hmm.
When you're meeting people, track the number of calls. Now, there's something I've learned in the Revitalize Business Network, and that is that accountability. I really love this. Every Monday morning, with a group of people, we're accountable to each other and we're accountable to ourselves.
Hmm.
We're looking at, um, you've got a fantastic metric. Do you want to explain this? Because I think it quite lends itself into sort of how you're tracking your accountability every week, the number of those 4 points that you've got, Lee. Do you want to
Yeah.
explain those for a second? I think that would be quite useful here.
Yeah, these are the thank you, Louisa. These are the cornerstones to networking in my eyes. And it's also been the cornerstones to business development for me for the past 30 plus years.
Mm.
So with everything like a metrics is number one, scaling yourself from 1 to 10 of how active you've been within the networks you're part of. That means how many networks you go into. Are you getting involved with them? Are you making sure you're ticking all the boxes? In other words, showing up, right? Which is
Mm.
the active part of it. And it's not just active in your networking groups, it's active online on your social media, on your platforms that way, because they're all sort of like virtual networks, really, Louisa. The second part is the engagement level. So the next area is engagement. How many one-to-ones are you conducting on a week by week basis? Are they meaningful one-to-ones? Are you following up from the one-to-ones? Are you finding out a lot of information from that as well? That's the engagement, engaging with the groups and the networks that you're part of, because at the end of the day, that's your pipeline. It's totally pipeline. The other part is what Louisa's just mentioned there is the accountability, not just to yourself, but also to the people that are around you in your networking group. And that's really extremely important to me in the Revitalized Business Club networking community, as Louisa's part of it, as you just mentioned there. The accountability is, are you showing up? Are you turning up to meetings, one-to-one and events and sort of bigger meetings in person, online, etc.? If you're not being visible, you're out of sight, you're out of mind. And that is the fourth area, is the visibility. Are you being visible for the right reasons? And if so, what are you sharing? Are you being visible for you, your business? And are you putting your visibility on the right spotlight for your business right about now? Because at the end of the day, people will buy from you with confidence and trust. I hope that
Exactly.
covers it.
Eh,
But with every four key area, it's rating yourself from a 1 to 10, and that's something that I've implemented into the weekly call that is Louisa's part of, that they all keep themselves accountable to as part of that sort of tracker, you want to call it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And what I do is I use that as a metric for my business. And funnily enough, I was having a look at because I've been recording this for the last year and a half. So I've got data from I think it was June 2024,
Love
I think. Maybe even earlier, maybe at the start of 2024. But every week on my call, I do my numbers. So I've got a score out of 40. And what I'm finding, and because I was looking at this week, whenever I have tens across the board, I have a slump week the week after because I'll have done so much in that week and I will have lots of calls, I'll be posting things, I will have gone to events. My week will have been so full that I need time to recover.
that.
And so I've been looking at the metrics and the last time, so last week I had a tens across the board week.
Brilliant.
The last time that happened was in February, and
Mm,
my scores dropped significantly the week after. And then it started to build back up as my energy got back up. And then
mm.
I've had another 10 and my energy's slumped again. So those metrics, even just for myself, for my accountability, are extremely important because I know that if I've had a really full on week, trying to maybe schedule so many calls the week after and give a little bit of space for myself to get my energy back up to be as effective as I can be.
Do you know what?
So
Do you know what's really interesting? Sorry, Louise. Again, with that point, what people don't do is rate themselves on their activities on a week-to-week basis. And it's
mm,
not just about one-to-one meetings. It's about the one-to-ones you're having, where you're having them, who are you meeting, when you met them, and then also tracking your activities on a week-to-week basis. Because if you're consistent with it and you're doing the right things and being visible for the right things, that's going to start generating inquiries, leads, and business for you. So I think what's wonderful, what you've done is literally, which I've encouraged everybody to do, is have a tracking list of it all. So you can actually see the
mm,
peaks and the troughs or the level areas, the plateaus that you've hit. And it paints a massive picture of your activity levels. Yeah.
yeah, and I probably would never have done it without Revitalize. So having that support function to help you understand your information, even if you don't think of it at the start as something that you can track, Like that's data I've got that I'm now using in as evaluation of my efforts in my business. I
Mhm.
know if I've had maybe a lower scoring week, what are the factors that led to that being a lower score? Was I focused more on clients than maybe networking? Did I not post as much on social
Mhm.
media, which sometimes happens when you get busy? You know, there's information that I can understand and work through from the basis of those four key areas where I can put a score out of 10 and
Mhm.
use that as a metric. So those really essential things of as I said, calls. How many calls do you do a week? How many calls do you do a month? you know
Mhm.
what is the implication of that maybe 30 or to 45-minute call
Yeah.
on your business, on your activity? Social media, are you posting regularly? Which, hands up, I struggle with this as well, because I realized in my July social calendar I actually haven't planned it all yet. I've got ideas of content, but until it's actually out there, it's useless.
Yeah.
Until I can understand how many people have responded to something, um, you know, until it's out there, it's not something you can measure.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's a lot of people that struggle with social media for consistency, but even putting out maybe something twice a week consistently will give you data.
That
It
is
will.
that is the word consistency, if I can pronounce it. Consistency is the word that you've got to use, and it's a big word. That actually, just coming onto that as well, though, and sorry to stop you where you are, but one of the things that we wanted to find out today, and you've actually just tapped on it perfectly, really well there, Louisa, right? Is how can data help you grow your business? And you've just
Mm,
tapped on their consistency, really. So, what's your thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, data is going to tell you, one, where to spend your money; two, where to invest your time;
Mm.
three, what what part of your business attracts people; and four, what are your clients like? So data is going to help you to understand, one, are clients happy to pay for what you're offering? If not, you can understand what is your offering to to potential clients. Are you missing something? Do you need to change um, the way that your packages are, because it's not connecting with people? Or is it sweet spot and suddenly you're bringing in a lot of leads and clients because they love what you're doing? Your money's at the right level that they're wanting to pay for your services. Everything's aligned. You have to allow the data to feed back to you.
Mm.
Um, and time is one of those things where um, i I found that tracking time gives me so much information about how much time I spend on things that I might not supposed to be spending time on.
Yeah.
Be very,
Yeah.
very honest on that. You know, um, Tracking time. So I use a tool called ClickUp, and I use it as a time tracker. There's great tools out there like Toggle. They will help you to understand your time. Um, it's it's one of those things where a lot of the time you only track when you're working on a client. But I really recommend anyone should track their time internally as well, and start to define what you're spending your time on,
Mm.
because you might be amazed at how much time. I wouldn't say it's wasted time, but it's time spent on something that's not going to grow your business. You know,
Nice way of putting it.
yeah. But I mean, education, if you're not spending enough time, like, go back to your that idea about HR. If you're not spending enough time learning in your business as well, your data is going to tell you that. But you
Mm.
have to then track your time about what you're spending it on.
Yeah.
Um, where to spend your money? How many mistakes have we made, Lee? I can tell you that we have made mistakes in business,
Yep.
financial or otherwise. Um,
Hmm.
the data will tell you how to be smarter with your money,
Yeah.
and that comes down to, I use a lot of different areas when I track my finances. So I assign different headings. So one of those headings is software. So when I buy software, and I buy a fair bit of software, I could tell you, um, I have it under that line. And what I'm doing is I have a sort of a cap. So every year I sort of have an idea about how much I want to spend on software. And
Mhm.
if I start to get on sort of towards the top of that, I revisit what am I actually using? What am I using it for? Is there a new product out there that can actually help me to do more of those, those tools that, that I want to use that I'm currently paying for separately, that sort of thing. So I use the data that I gather in a way that will give me more clarity on am I spending money that I don't need to spend.
Yeah.
Data is going to really help you understand the absolute foundations of a business. So when you grow, you know that that metric or that information that you're bringing in and understanding it
Mm.
will inform you of whether that's a good idea or not.
Yeah. Do you know what's really good though? What you've just mentioned there is, I mean, I love the way you've got that investment, the tracking, the education, and the adapting and improving, which is my take on the money, time people like and dislike.
Hmm.
When you're tracking what people like and dislike, you can actually adapt your improvements all the time because of that. And you're
Yeah.
actually addressing what people are telling you what they like about it, but then they go, not really bothered about that. So you just move it out and try something different. Um,
I've got a tip for you on this actually.
Go on then.
So when you have a resource or you want to put something out there, so for instance, the QR code that's at the top of my screen, how many times is that clicked?
Mhm.
I can actually set up a something called a redirect. It means that if you've got a URL or a resource, you would probably have a URL for it. You can set up a redirect that counts how many people click on that URL.
Right.
Um, so I would suggest if you have no idea about how many times someone opens a resource, take a look at a redirect. So you
Mm,
can do it through SEO has redirections, or I use something called Pretty Links,
mm,
and it will show you how many clicks of something as simple as a URL, but it'll inform you about whether that resource is being received. If it's getting 500 clicks, the resource must be good.
mm.
Something else is getting 20 clicks, can you redevelop that resource to look maybe more like the one that's getting really good visibility?
Yeah.
you know use that information to inform you. And I think when you start out, you don't know about things like tracking links, but
Mm,
they are a very interesting form of information
mm.
to allow you to understand what's working, what isn't.
Yeah. Love that. I think that's good. And what you've mentioned throughout this as well, Louisa, is really how you're making people. I think a lot of people get worried when they hear data, when
Yeah.
they hear systems, and they hear processes, routines that's in there. But on this occasion, it's actually you're trying your best to really educate everybody of how making data can be a good friend of yours. Correct?
It can be. Please don't be scared of data. Please do not be scared of trying to understand your data, because data is the backbone of business, and businesses who thrive understand their data. So
Mhm.
try to understand the basics, work with maybe a small data set, get familiar with it, get to know it, and then maybe build something else on top of that that you can then start to understand. But you need to look at your data every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, because you'll be looking at different metrics to adjust as you're going. So if you only look at your data every 3 months because your accountant tells you that you have to submit a report to him, in that 3 months, what have you missed out on that you could have changed or pivoted because the data was telling you that there was a better path to follow?
Mm, mm.
Um, how many companies or how many small businesses don't even do an annual report?
No.
But the value of an annual report is so insurmountable, because it will give you metrics that you can use year by year to inform you of your progress.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, I recommend every small business owner do an annual report, not for everyone else, but even just for yourself.
mhm.
You know, put a metric in for how many cups of coffee you drink. You could probably work that out.
I don't
You,
want to do that, by the way.
I was going to say
My
yours might be a little bit higher than others.
goodness, man. I've had 7, 8 cups of coffee today already, and we're only at about nearly come to 3 o'clock this afternoon. So I drink far too much coffee. But when you start looking at the financial side of it, wow, I don't even share that information, I don't think, really. So that's a lot of coffee.
Yeah, but I think when people talk about business plans, I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah,
Small businesses are scared to create a business plan because they don't understand forecasting. But what you could do is maybe take, so for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, I'm going to post ten social media posts here. I'm going to do 15 there, 20 in quarter 3, and 30 in quarter 4.
yeah,
That's a very basic metric. You
mm,
could then go, okay, so when I did that, this is what the information told me. This is what the information told me in quarter 2. You can use those really basic things to give you guidance on where your business could grow.
mm,
Um, but be consistent. I mean, we've talked about that almost the whole way through.
totally.
Um, Consistent is important when you're looking at data,
Mm,
because data on its own will not provide you with enough information to make an informed decision. But data, when you've gathered it across a period of time, will tell you a story.
yeah.
And we all know how important stories are to business.
They are indeed, Louisa. They are indeed. They are indeed, indeed. So understanding your data is really important. That's what we've covered today, and I think what you've covered is some really good pointers there, Louisa. Again, and just to clarify one key area there, we talk about sales, leads, conversions. Looking at conversations that you're having, how you're tracking that, and the word that we use quite regularly today is consistency. You kind of forget about that so much, really. And I think, in very true, Steve Lees has just jumped on there on the LinkedIn platform. He's just put the information into intelligence. Love that.
Absolutely.
100%, Mr. Lees, or Mr. Frankie Grit, aka Frankie Grit. Information into intelligence, I think, is extremely important. But that's right, though, Louise, wasn't it? Really, just before we wrap things up with this first episode, Steve's right. You're
Yeah.
right. That's what you're saying. People forget about it's giving you the tools
Yeah.
of how you can actually improve it on a weekly, daily, monthly basis for your business.
Yeah. And I mean, intelligence metrics, these are just words, but when you're looking at data, it's important. How important is that data for your business? What is it
Mm,
going to do for you? How can you use it? You know, if you're not collecting it, you cannot use it. So that's the basics of data in business. If you're not measuring it, you cannot use it.
Well,
So
put it this way, right? So if you mentioned coffee before, joking aside, right? Intelligence into that one. So let's say, for example, me and you had organized 5 meetings over the next week, and they're all meeting in person. So you can do the metrics and data of how you've traveled to get there, time wise.
mhm,
You get there and you might have 2, 3 cups of coffee. By the end of the week, you've had 5 meetings with 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 cups of coffee. That's an investment of money. You mentioned that in our first little metrics.
mhm,
So you can measure out your time, you can measure out the cups of coffee, you can measure out the meetings, and the outcome from the back of that is, did those meetings hit the mark, and did you convert it into potential leads or sales for your business as a return on investment? There's a bit
exactly.
of lineup.
Yeah. So they've got a number of metrics there. It's like a follow up. So how many times do you follow up? You can measure that as well. If
Yep.
someone says, "Oh, that was great. Let's do this again,"
Mm,
have a goal of what, the first one might be exploratory, but have a goal for the next one,
mm,
because your first inquiry might not lead to anywhere at that time, but it's that getting to know you part that is an investment in your business.
yeah.
When that person comes back 6 months and says, I remember you said something really interesting. Can we go through that a little bit more? I'd like to learn more.
Mm,
So if you haven't measured that first one, how can you then assess it against the second one?
very true.
Yeah,
So very
great
true.
point.
Oh, it's a really good point there, Louisa. Thanks very much for sharing that with us as well. If anybody's got any questions or anything you want to find out from Louisa, I would highly recommend that you connect with her through LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn with us now and watching this live, click on the name, connect with Louisa, and organize a one-to-one meeting. You never know what you're going to find out. There'd be a wealth of knowledge you could tap
Mhm.
into. Is that the best way of getting in touch with you, Louisa?
Yep. So the QR code there, you can see up in the top, just scan that and it'll take you through to my details.
Perfect.
But yes, please send through any questions. So we'll be on next week, so I can actually take some questions and answer them next week too. So please don't be scared to ask about, if you don't understand your data, explore that a bit more and bring some questions in, because we want people to feel really comfortable with this topic. This is why we're doing the series.
100%, 100%. And if whoever's watching and listening right now, please share this on to anybody else you think is just start up in business or they want to learn a bit more from us. Please forward on this episode via my YouTube channel, which is Lee Foster Official, which you can find the playlist in there for the Newpreneur Cast. And we'll be back next week. It's on the 8th of July in the afternoon. And the topic for today, for the day next week, our second episode, is going to be mapping your business for
I
data.
love it.
Mapping your business. So we'll be
This is
delving into another few areas, won't we, Louisa?
Yeah, this is the area that I absolutely shine in. I love to talk about mapping your business. Again, it's an area that I think people might not understand. They feel uncomfortable with it. So let's get into it and help you to add another layer of understanding your data for your business.
Brilliant. And don't forget, everybody, if you are on YouTube now, and it's the first time you've landed on the site, click the subscribe button, subscribe, and you'll be notified whenever anything's coming up on the YouTube channel, especially these special editions that we're doing with the Newpreneur Cast as well. So massive thanks to everybody who's watching and listening, especially to Frankie Grit for adding a comment into there in the chat again. Thank you very much, Mr. Grit. Really do appreciate it, aka Steve Lees. Louisa, thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thank you, Lee. Really
Absolutely
appreciate it.
superb. No, you're welcome. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening to our first business data series for July, episode 1. We'll see you back for episode 2 in a week's time on the 8th of July as well. Thank you from me. Massive thank you from Louisa. And we look forward to seeing you all again very soon on the Newpreneur Cast Special Edition. Take